this was a good week of chapters with One Piece's return and the end of Ayashimon. So we're going to be starting off with One Piece, chapter 1050, and this was a good chapter, showing the conclusion, the absolute end of the raid arc with Luffy's ultimate victory. It shows that Kaido and Big Mom are plunged into a magma core, which then erupts in like the ocean near Wano. And what I'm predicting with that is Big Mom and Kaido will now land on like the new little landmass that the magma was on and float away until the Queen Mama Shanter shows up, grabs them, and they'll both end up going back to Whole Cake Island, which, as the cover story is showing, is currently on fire. So that'll be good for them to be filled with bitter hate and rage to then go back home to find more problems that they'll have to deal with. As for the end of Kaido, that's it, but the Beast Pirates still plan on fighting, not believing in the proclamation from Nekomamushi, who seemingly witnessed what happened, as well as then Yamato arriving to tell the Beast Pirates to stop, as he is now a part of the Straw Hat Alliance. We also see that everyone's hurt, and Chopper is being swamped with patience, and several other fallout things, seeing everyone seemingly rejoice at the news of Luffy's victory, as well as Momo being able to save them all. We then also see the ultimate betrayal of the arc, which I had called, of Momo not opening the border at all. Now, he said yet, meaning the way this is probably going to go is Momo is not going to open the borders of Wano now because he wants to rebuild Wano, and once it's ready to be open to the rest of the world and show how beautiful Wano is, the country that Odin wanted to show the world when Luffy arrived, when he did, if Odin had survived his ordeal, then he'll open the border. I don't see that working out if this wasn't what it was. Knowing Oda, everything will be fine, they'll close the border, and then by the time that Raftel happens, the Wano army and reinforcements will arrive, showing that they've opened the border after whatever length of time they take to get to Raftel. I still think I don't know how to feel about this decision to have Momo not open the border. I would like to think it's a borderline villainous move, and now Momo will be a new tyrant that takes over Wano, but I don't see that happening as much as I would like it to, or that's sort of the logical step that it'll take, because Momo wasn't necessarily a good guy character to begin with, but he'll end up having that good of heart. He's still young, so he'll make honest mistakes, but ultimately have the good of everyone in mind when he's making those decisions, so whatever. But I know they had said it before, and I had known that he was going to stick with that. We'll see how the others react to that news. It would be interesting if they didn't react favorably. They try to get Momo to do something about it, and Momo like rebels against them, saying no or something like that, and they actually have to fight again. It would be interesting. What'll happen is that Luffy won't care about Wano and what Momo does. All he cared about was that now everyone gets to have food, and they more or less survived. He'll end up skipping town like nothing happened, putting down that it's under his protection again, and that'll be the end of the arc. But for now, we're entering the news phase, the post-war arc, which is very exciting as we see that Momo gets back up, travels over to Onigashima. They all think he's Kaido, but he says not to worry before shrinking down to normal size. The red scabbards that are alive, I didn't actually look close enough at it, but I know there were a couple of the red scabbards that were there, and Komurasaki, as they then introduce the new Shogun of Wano. But we don't get that reveal. That'll be next week, and then we'll start getting more news feeds, probably after about 5-10 chapters of the finishing up, tidying up of Wano. We'll get some other nation, around the world news, and see that everything is on fire. So overall, I think I'll give this chapter an A. It was good to get the conclusion fully concluded, and now we get to have the post-war arc, which is always a fan favorite for everyone, because we get to see how the world changed after Luffy did what he did. The amount of time hyper-focusing on the events that happen in whatever Straw Hat arc is going on, but then seeing what the effects of either that arc in particular, or just everything else going on in the world, is what makes One Piece oh so very exciting, because it's not just time stands still for the Straw Hats. The world world continues to move. We have a lot of exciting weeks ahead, and I look forward to seeing what Oda decides to show and what is going to be told in the newspaper, what world events have happened. So now we're on to Undead Unluck chapter 112, and this was a good chapter, continuing with Andy arriving at the Union base, seeing its incomplete shambles, and traveling down. We also see that Unruin and Seal have arrived, but they were countered and seemingly are in a fight with Titania. We'll see how that fight goes, or if Unruin is still a terrible person and destroys everyone we know before Andy is able to save them. However, we get to see Andy continue to go whatever way he was going and stop off to see Nico's assistant and child, it would seem. And the assistant saved Nico's daughter, the one girl that looks like him, but asks that Andy take her with him to find out what's going on to save her. He then continues to go and meets up with Nico, and they begin to fight. We find out that Nico only really cared about his wife and was given the choice of saving the world and killing God, which was a very high priority for him, or seeing his wife, and it seems as though he chose his wife this time in particular and plans on more or less destroying everything for whatever reason. He then fights Andy as Andy gets more and more irritated by the decision he's made. The chapter ends with quite the interesting nugget of information, which Nico implies that even Andy will lose his memory for whoever goes through the next loop. Meaning that Fuko will be truly on her own more than ever, at least unless Andy proves otherwise, or states otherwise. That in the next loop, he'll remember any previous loop, but if not, well, that's quite different. It seems as though he would remember, but with that little tagline, now it throws it into doubt. Maybe he has to implant his memories. Maybe it's because Juiz was able to accrue points. Maybe it's just simply because Andy kept accruing points through multiple loops, but giving it to someone else, that he would then lose his memory whenever they would go through another loop. So many questions. It's very interesting to see what they're going to do, as well as how this fight's going to go. Nico seems like a fairly interesting character. We're probably going to get some sort of backstory from him now to allow Fuko a better opportunity to save him, quote unquote, from whatever fate he ended up having to deal with in the original timeline, this one in particular. She's going to have to try to save him from. So many moving parts, many interesting moving parts. The future of this series is extremely bright if it's allowed to continue to grow as it's been. So overall, I think I'll give this chapter a B. It was good seeing the continued progression of the story, as well as seeing the other Union members fighting off the major villains of this arc so far on Ruin and Seal, as well as getting some motivation from Nico, as well as finding out a little bit more about what could potentially happen to the world if Fuko is pushed forward through the loop. Or maybe, I don't think so, at least what it's implied here a few chapters ago, I don't think Andy will go through the loop, if that makes sense. We'll have to see, though. It'll be very interesting, all things considered. Now we're on to Mashle, Magic and Muscles, chapter 109, and this was a good chapter showing the beginning of the final battle. We see the bully from an earlier bit of the story, trying just to survive as the giants are attacking. Ultimately, he gets caught by the giants because a kid goes over to him, and he's ultimately believed to be dead until Rion, one of the divine visionaries that was helping Mash, arrives, saying he's humanity's greatest weapon, and the whole showboaty performance before taking out pretty much every giant in the area, showing just how vastly powerful the divine visionaries can be. It'll be very interesting to see how the others handle the situation and buy time, as Melodol has to now very quickly heal Mash to get him back up to speed, even though it'll take a day, 24 hours, for her to do so, because if she doesn't do that, they'll blame her her for their loss, which I think is hysterical because it's half her fault for beating him up after he was too tired. So now we have a race against time as they have to now stall out for Mash's big hero moment because of course he's out of commission for now, leaving it that now everyone who's trained hard and everyone who's very powerful has to step forward to save the day until Mash shows up at the end of the battle and ultimately one punches Innocent Zero, which I think is hysterical. So overall, I think I'll give this chapter a B. It was good. It showed the power of the divine visionaries as well as seeing the ultimate quote-unquote evil of the villain army approaching. Seeing as how even the Giants' leader didn't like Innocent Zero, but he hated the other humans more, and thus he was willing to work with Innocent Zero until ultimately he proved himself to be the strongest and was going to take out Innocent Zero. That didn't work as he seemingly died here, but he at least had a good thought behind it. Not really. So it'll be interesting to see where all the fights go. Now we're on to Sakamoto Days chapter 72, and this was a good chapter showing the conclusion of the exam portion of the new quote-unquote school days saga here, as everyone who pretty much survived passed, so all the major characters we've known, as everyone's getting patched up and healed. We then see that many are doing just fine and they will be beginning their classes soon, and we'll get to see what that entails as Sakamoto is going to find out what he needs to find out. One of the instructors recognized him after seeing his name and was surprised that he was there and even asked, where then Sakamoto just told him he needed to do something and this was the best way. They didn't really go further, which I thought was fairly funny. The fangirl was extremely shocked to see what Sakamoto really looks like and was completely disheartened. It'll be interesting to see how she reacts seeing Sakamoto save her for a potential second time after what happened at the end of this chapter. We also see that Slur knows that Sakamoto was a part of the exam, and we see that Slur realizes what Sakamoto's after, and so now there's a bit of a race to see who can get the information they need first, as we see the kid and the fangirl get into a helicopter to be transported away, only to find that the director, the cameraman director character from the plane that destroyed the plane, is now seemingly either riding or driving the helicopter, and we see another seemingly top-tiered assassin telling them to not move. We then hear that Slur tells the other assassin to not harm those two. They are their new allies. Now it seems as though they're being kidnapped and forced to join Slur. It'll be very interesting what they do, if any, to try to alert the others or try to escape the situation, or if they even just join, which I don't see. Maybe the girl, but I don't think the kid will. It'll be very interesting to see what the next chapter holds, because that shock ending really elevated this chapter. It was a good end. It was going to be a nice flash forward, but that ending really shocked me. I didn't think the director was a part of Slur's group, really proving you just don't know who's a part of the enemy in this series, which is exciting. So overall, I think I'll give this chapter an A. It was very good, especially the ending. Everything else was good, seeing the conclusion of it, that they all passed and that we're going to potentially be going forward in the story, but the twist at the end really elevated it for me in particular because of how deadly the situation became so quickly. We'll also see if the two of the students survive this ordeal trying to escape, because I doubt they're going to willingly go even at quote-unquote gunpoint. I'm also surprised that the henchman that was fighting everyone selected those two. I didn't think he would. I thought he would go after Shin and maybe the hearing guy because they gave the most fight, but I guess he was more impressed with those two. So we'll see how that whole situation goes next week, which is probably the most interesting bit for next week. And now we're on to Ayashimon chapter 25, and this was in itself an okay chapter. It really wasn't much. They concluded the fight. The main character saved the main villain of this arc, and then the kind of boss of the gang ended up telling them they can go fight the main villain again if they were willing to, and the main two characters whose bond grew after they saved the villain of this arc said that they would be going, and so we get a final stare down between the main villain and the main characters before ultimately it ends. So the chapter itself is fine. fine. It doesn't end any particular way. It leaves the story open if it wanted to continue, but at this point, any series that ends. It does not look like any of them will ever return, which is genuinely quite sad, because several of these stories that get cut may be cut for decent reasons. They could have been revived, but they weren't. So overall, I think I'll give this chapter a C. It was just fine, nothing great. For an ending chapter, it just didn't finish, if that makes sense. I do like the open-ended endings to canceled series, but this one felt the most unfinished of all of them thus far. For the series as a whole, I think it was a fine series. I think it had some fun ideas, a really great atmosphere early, and some intriguing potential, but ultimately it sort of fumbled out of the gate after a little while, and it couldn't pick back up the pace, and Shonen Jump is not patient enough to allow a story that fell off the track to get back on. So ultimately, I'd give Ayashimon a B minus, a C plus. It was fine. It didn't do anything spectacular outside of some of its atmosphere and some of its premise, but ultimately it feels like the most incomplete of the stories that get cut off. Outside of maybe I Tell C, but even then it got a relatively okay conclusion that is very much open-ended, as the story very much didn't end. So this one felt unfinished, which is unfortunate. So that was all the major chapters. They were all very good, especially One Piece and Sakamoto Days. Undead continues to be the most healthy series in Shonen Jump right now, as Sakamoto is still very much there. Its story is very much going, but it doesn't have a clear picture of what the story is going to be, like Undead Unluck. One Piece is nearing the end of its life, as we're only having maybe one or two more arcs, sagas left. We got a long time with it still, but if Oda is forced to pick up the pace to end the series relatively quickly because Shonen Jump feels it's losing money on it or something, then I'd feel not so great about the odds of we getting a satisfying conclusion to One Piece, though hopefully that's me being pessimistic. MASH seemingly being at its end is a shame, unless again it's a swerve, which would be very fun, because the story itself is just very goofy. You really can't tell if it's healthy or not in that way. So again, all very good this week. Now for everything else, My Hero was fine. Jujutsu Kaisen was fine. Had a very nice fight. Jujutsu Kaisen is very action heavy. Way too much text to explain all the fight scenes and everything. It's probably why it works so great in the anime. As much as you have to get explained to, it does work better, just like Hunter x Hunter, when the fighting system is super complex, yet pseudo-understandable. So it was fine. The fighting continues to be the best part, and that's what the series mostly is at this point. Blue Box is fine. More of the same. Yazakura Family was good, seeing more of the father's motivations, or lack thereof, outside of reviving his wife, and the resolve of the rest of the Yazakura family to take him down to save everyone. The tension that is built in the chapter is actually very good, because it doesn't quite let up even at the end of the chapter. Because you know there's going to be some sort of fight which will end up having maybe one of the family members being killed by the father, which would be a bold decision, and I would very much give them a lot of credit for that, but we'll have to see, because next chapter should be another big fight, so I look forward to seeing what happens there. The Elusive Samurai was very good. We had the end of the fight where an ingenious attack method was implemented to allow the main character to kill the main bad guy in this arc, which was surprising the way they did it, and he genuinely got him. He killed him. It was bold decision making to see that the main character finished the job and got rid of one of the villains here, one of the generals. So we'll see how this victory is going to affect morale of both sides, of the villains and the heroes in this case, the good and bad guys, and see how the battle continues for the main character's home when they eventually get there. The story itself is also very healthy because there's a clear path, like Undead Unluck. So P times 6 was good. It seems as though we're getting some sort of competition with Lucky and one of his siblings, so that should be pretty interesting to see how that ends up playing up. The family drama, to see if he can win, if he can lose, Also, the mother seems to have worsened in condition, so we'll have to see how the family deals with that knowledge. Doron was fine, continuing its fight, seeing how the main characters are abnormal, and seeing more fighting. We'll see if this one continues its momentum or if it starts to peter out, though I imagine just more epic fights could keep this one alive for a fairly decent run. So we'll have to see. Then a new series that I've caught up to, in Earthchild, and it was fine. The series itself is fine. Very different than what I thought, and I wonder how long it'll go. It could be a fun series akin to Spy Family, if done right and done for a long time. It'll be very interesting to see how this shapes up, especially as they've seemingly succeeded in saving the main character's wife. So we'll have to see how this series goes. It's still fairly young, so we'll see if it survives any longer, or if it's just a short series after he saves his wife. It's over. That seemed like a waste, but it very much could. And then the actual very new series of Super Smartphone, which is intriguing in its premise and its presentation, but I'll have to see how truly unique it is. Another smart character has some sort of thing that puts them onto a different level. It's an interesting premise, having it that a super smartphone, seemingly alien technology thing, is given to seemingly smart individuals to use to try to rack up points, it would seem, for some sort of purpose. And so we'll see some mental battles between those smartphone users if it survives that long. And so that's it. That's all of the chapters. They were all pretty good. Some new series to be introduced here. I'm going to try to catch up to pretty much everything that I can on the Viz app, just to see what is good and what is not for my own perspective. If there's a series in Viz's library for each week that you particularly want me to cover in any way that I haven't covered already, let me know. Otherwise, I'll try to cover everything as much as I can, as you can see, as I've been doing. So with that, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and as always, thank you for watching.